Oh, welcome back to the second hour of LoveBabz, Love Talk on Babz Rawls-Ivy. Thank you for tuning in to 103.5 WNHH. And of course, we're live streaming across all the social media sites, Facebook, X, YouTube, Twitch. So tune in at all the spots on WNHH, New Haven Independent, and LoveBabz, Love Talk. Hey! I am delighted to welcome Katrina Jackson, author. By day, she's Dr. Nicole M. Jackson at Bowling Green State University, associate professor. And by night, she is the fabulously talented author, Katrina Jackson. Hello.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I am so delighted to meet you. I know you're coming to Lit Fest, and it's all about romance this year. So I'm excited to hear what brought you to this genre of books.
Mostly depression.
Okay, we all have our reasons. Do tell.
Um, I mean, I started reading romance like actively, like in the midst of like a heavy election season where I just felt as if like the world was rough and I needed like a
Mm,
shot of hope, to be
hmm
honest with you. Um, and I just happened to find like authors who clicked with me. Like I've always loved to read, but like romance was not my like genre of choice. And so I ended up here when I just needed like a lot of happiness.
I like that. And so, did you find it easy to start writing romance? Like, what was the what if you wanted to tell a romance story, where did you start? Did you just say, I'm gonna draw from my own life? Am I just gonna make everything up? Like, how did you get started?
I mean, so I got started um writing romance in a slightly different time period, but still depression. And I think that what I wanted was in those early stories to think about something that felt totally new. And as I've written over the years, I've started writing more from my own experience, from the life I live. Like I write a lot about academics and academia. Um, and I write a lot about the things that I love, like history and like Black music. So um, I think I sort of evened out over time with sort of thinking about, like Toni Morrison said, like there were stories I wanted to read, so I wrote them.
And you write with a bit of erotica.
Not a bit, a lot.
A lot. And so how do you work that in? Because for Black women, anything sexual, we are only in two categories as according to the world. We're either whores or Madonnas. Do you
Yeah,
know what I mean? Like we're either
yeah,
long-suffering mammies or loose women. How do
yeah.
we how do you balance out a truth? How do you carve out a different perspective?
I think I just reject that binary, right? Like, I when I was younger, I read Zane like a lot of people in my
Hmm
age group. I love Zane. Um, and I read her certainly too young, but I read her young enough to rethink that sort of binary later on in my life, to really sort of question if it had to be either or, right? And so when I started writing erotica and I started writing erotic romance, I just reject the possibility that like Black women have to be either or, that because they are sexually open or because they are questioning their own sexuality or because they are just sexual, right? That somehow makes them less than, or it makes them bad.
Mm. And so, do you find yourself trying to explain Black women's freedom and agency around their sexual habits or desires or any of that?
Um, I mean, I literally do explain it. Like I teach about like Black women's sexuality and history, and a lot of my like literal teaching is about how that binary is a stereotype, right? Like we can look back in history and see that there are queer Black women who exist, that there are queer Black people who exist, that there are people who are having children out of wedlock, right? Like this idea that those stereotypes have to conform to reality are just not true. And so that's the explanation that I do in my job as a professor. And so in my job as a writer, I just don't have to.
Mm.
Or
And
I will
so,
say that I won't.
and as a professor and a writer, do these worlds collide? Are they easy to manage? Do they blend into each other?
Um, um, I think they're starting to collide a little bit more. Like this sort of Lit Fest in the conference at Yale is maybe the most they have connected. But I think they do also meet in my own writing, right? Like I am writing about things that are informed by my own research, my own reading on Black history. So,
Oh, I like that. So I just come to understand recently that somebody had said that romance writers aren't taken seriously. That romance as a genre is not taken seriously as other fiction and highfalutin sort of work. What do you say to that?
um, I mean, I think that there have been moments in literary history where that has been true, certainly. Um, I don't know that that's really true today is my big sort of pushback. I do think though that like certainly in the 80s and 90s there was a lot of discussion about romance, whether or not it was even literature, whether or not it was just, sort of, excuse my language, like porn for like housewives, right? But I think today it's a different playing field. Like there are lots of like really fantastic romance authors who are writing in other genres. There's a lot of sort of conversation about the literary merits of romance. And I think that landscape has shifted in the past, like, maybe decade or so.
Mm. And so who reads you? Like what is your readership? And when you start to write a book, Katrina, do you have that audience in mind?
I'll answer the second first, which is no. Like I am my primary audience. Like I'm writing books that I want to read. I'm telling stories I want to tell. Um, and I think my audience is pretty varied, actually, surprisingly. I write a lot of queer characters, so I have like a very large queer audience, which makes me really happy. Um, I write a lot of academics, and so I have a lot of academics who read my books, for better or worse. And I have a lot of Black female like readers, of course. Like I'm writing for myself, I'm writing Black female characters. But I also have like a lot of male readers and non-binary readers as well. Like it's just a really large cross section of people that I've had the pleasure of meeting. They email me about parts of the book that resonate with them. So I do when I don't know who my audience is. And so it would be impossible for me to write a story for all of them. So I write for myself. And at least so far that has worked.
And I gather that you are committed to having diverse characters.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that. Like, what does that mean?
For me, it means that there's always at least one Black American character in all of my books. Like I'm writing from, in that case, my own standpoint. But I always say that I write books that sort of filter or that look like the world I grew up in. I'm from like Northern California, so there are a whole bunch of Latinos, in particular Mexican Americans, in my books. I'm a diaspora historian, so there are lots of Black people from the diaspora in my books, like from Africa, from the Caribbean, from Latin America. Um, so far, there are lots of queer characters in my books as the main characters and as secondary characters because that's the world I am in and that I recognize as my reality. Um, and there are lots of people across the class spectrum too. Like I'm not someone, I mean, everyone is different, but I'm not someone who's particularly invested in telling stories of rich people. I don't know what that's like. That's not my life. So I don't want to, that's a fantasy I'm not trying to live necessarily. Um, and then a thing I also do, which is really important to me, is I write a lot of sex workers. Like I have known a lot of sex workers. I believe that sex work is work. And so I want to write those characters with dignity.
So where's the romance? Because that sounds like a lot. That sounds like a lot when you're talking about sex workers, when you're talking about the queer community, and I don't think anybody ever thinks about those folks having romance and then you don't throw any money. Like what?
I didn't
This
say
is
no money. I just said I'm not writing rich people. Like most of us
okay.
are living like middle class or less, right? Like when we are still out here living and loving, right? Like that's money is not a prerequisite for love. Um,
Hmm.
but I also think it's only a lot if you think that those people are a lot, right? Like if you think that those people are exceptional. So, one of my favorite stories is literally it's called like Back in the Day, which is a book two of a series, and I'm writing or the story is about a young man who's helping his father move out of their house in Oakland, California, which is my hometown. And in the process of moving out, his father is really adamant that he has to go with his record collection. And his son is like, fam, this is a very large collection. Why do we have to do this? And in the process of explaining that, he tells his son how he met his mother 40 years before. Like this is, and that's like for me, like a really obvious like entry point to tell this like love story that spans decades. But that's also about like gentrification in Oakland. That's also about what it looks like to love someone. These are two artists, a writer and a photographer. Like all of that can be bound up in one, right? Or I have a spy series that begins with um, a, um, a personal assistant who hates her job because she's in love with her bosses, and so she's trying to quit. And like her best friend is a cam girl, like who falls in love with the spy. Like if you create a world where none of these people um, are tokens, right? Like they exist in this space, right? Because we all have friends who like maybe have jobs we wouldn't do or like are maybe struggling, right? Or we've struggled at different parts of our lives. Like if we understand that like this is what the world and what friend groups look like, then it's not too much for me.
Hmm. Okay, so you're writing these wonderful books all across different genres with erotica and romance and all of that. Uh, has anybody optioned any books? Can you see some of your characters on the screen? Big screen, little screen? Can you see that? Do you wish for that?
I mean, I wish for anything. So yeah, I will take all opportunities. No one has optioned any books for me, but if you have a friend, like let them but yeah, I can actually see them as like in my head, like a lot of like the work I do and sort of thinking about the story is about playing it out in my head. And so when I sit down to write, like I do have like something like sort of happen, like a sort of reel going in my head. But yes,
Mm.
if someone would like to option any of my books, I'm here.
Because I see a lot of these streaming services need content, and people are doing some amazing stuff with putting a short series out and movies out on Netflix and Apple and all these places. Not your traditional make a film a year, 2 years, and then it goes to like movies theaters. And people are doing work and putting it on these streaming services, and it's
Yeah.
really, really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, you know, that is happening. And I wish there was more of that. I especially wish there was more of that that didn't look exactly like everything else that's out there. Like, and I
Yeah.
would not be me if I didn't say that, right? Like, we've seen a lot of optioning of like diverse romances written by authors of color, but at least thus far, none of them have made it to screen. So,
Mm.
and that's a shame.
Hmm. So when you sit down to craft something, where does the inspiration come from, Katrina? Are you walking down the street on your way to the farmer's market? Are you at a party? Are you coming out of a relationship? How do you get inspired to write anything and everything?
Literally anywhere and everywhere.
Like, do you carry a notebook around? Like, how do you keep up? How do you keep up with the thoughts and the ideas?
Oh, I wish I carried a notebook. That would make my life easier. No, I mean, so I've gotten like one of my most popular books called Office Hours. I literally started writing while I was on the tenure track, and it's about a character who's on the tenure track. So I wrote it slowly over the course of like 2 or 3 years while I was literally going up for tenure. And it was literally me looking around and being like, "Ooh, this job is rough," and like everyone has it rough, right? Now, how you craft that into a romance, like, we got there eventually, but like that was my inspiration. But then it's as simple as like sometimes it's like, song lyrics, sometimes it's reading someone else's book and wondering if I could like put my own spin on that as well, like literally anywhere.
Hmm. Now, did I read a piece, or was this on your website about struggle love? Was that
Oh
was
yeah.
Talk to me about that, because I'm such an I don't understand this whole idea of a struggle love and how people are so invested in what I imagine struggle love to be. So give me a definition of struggle love, and why did you speak on it?
So the definition that is floating around social media and has been for a few years is essentially a number of readers saying that they don't want to read Black romance or urban romance or urban fiction because they imagine that it's struggle love. And their definition seems to be that it is chaotic and toxic, and like a dead end is the general description that people have used. And in my opinion, which is what that piece is about, is that that's incredibly biased, because if you were to hop on TikTok today, you'd see a lot of people telling you to read the latest dark romance, which usually begins with the male main character, the quote unquote hero, kidnapping his love interest and sort of spending a bit of time like torturing her in various ways as on their road to their happily ever after, right? But the distinction there is that those characters are not people, they're not Black, right? Or at least they're not both Black. And I think that, one of the ways that like romance has not changed in the last few years, because it's the thing I'm interested in as a scholar, is that it's marginalization of Black authors telling Black stories, right? Interracial romance has always been a pretty popular subgenre, and it is absolutely one today. But Black authors writing Black romance where everyone involved in the romance is Black has remained really marginalized in this space.
Wow. So where do you see the future of this going? I mean, do you do you feel like you're helping move the needle forward? And who are you reading these days?
I would like to think I'm helping move the needle forward, but I also recognize, thankfully, that there are so many other people out there who are also doing that. I'm a huge fan of Beverly Jenkins, who writes historical Black romance. I just think that like her stories are not just sort of like really sort of lovely to read and kind of fall into, but also as a historian, I think those novels are so well crafted from a historical standpoint. Like if you're interested in Black history, like you can learn Black history in the pages of her books, which is super rare. So I'm a huge fan of her. I'm a huge fan of Alyssa Cole. Actually, I found Beverly Jenkins through Alyssa Cole. Like that was a recommendation she made of an author she read. I think Alyssa Cole, right? She's writing thrillers right now, but her romances are some of the most progressive and clear and just like beautifully written books I've ever read in any genre. And I love like Rebecca Weatherspoon. My friend Tasha L. Harrison writes really good ones. I mean, there are just lots of like authors who write really fantastic books who I think are pushing the needle forward in lots of really cool ways.
Mm. And so how often are you writing books? How often are you putting books out?
Less now. The pandemic has been rough on me. So
And
I need
why?
a
Why
break.
has the pandemic been rough? Because you're held up somewhere. That seems like that would be the perfect time to like dive into writing.
Well, I mean, one, I teach, so I do have like a
Oh, so
job
you have
that
to.
is is demanding. Um, and there's that, and like teaching, like I mean, lots of teachers and professors will tell you that teaching during the pandemic was a rough thing to do. So I think we're all kind of recovering from that. But I also think like lots of people like the last few years have taken a particular toll on me, like mentally and also physically. And so right now I'm writing much less than I used to, just because I'm trying to focus on like actually resting, like actually
Mm.
like taking time to like live my life, which is where I get inspiration for books, and to like reconnect with people or connect with people who I love. So right now, like I'm not writing really much at all. But I'm still teaching, so
Well, you got to eat, right?
you
Because
gotta eat, right? I'm still teaching.
I mean, I know you're selling books too, but you know, you have to
Yeah,
figure out what's the bigger, you know, because you're on. Are you tenured track? Are you tenured?
I'm tenured now.
Okay. Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
And I think you talk a little bit about that because you took a Sabbath, or you were taking a Sabbath, or you're about to take a Sabbath.
I took a sabbatical.
Yeah. Yes, a
Before it.
sabbatical. I'm
Yeah,
sorry. I'm
but
in
no, it's
my
fine.
religious mind. And how was that? Was that I don't
Um,
think it was everything you thought it was going to be, at
it
least
was
from what I
not.
could read.
It was not. It was not. No, so my sabbatical started in the fall of 2019. So the latter half of it was the start of the pandemic, which was a very sort of interesting transition to rest, but not quite. Um, but I think that so much of like that like academia itself and like being a professor, which I write about a lot in my book, is that like I didn't really know what to expect. Like I didn't come from a family where I was the first person in my family to get a college degree. I stumbled into graduate school and being a professor, and so I write a lot about what it's like to be a girl from a working class family who had like no precedent for this, right? And who is looking at a system that existed long before me and will exist long after me, and wanting to do good work there, but also seeing how easy it is for me to burn myself out.
Mm. And so when you write about those kinds of things, is it cathartic?
Sometimes, yeah.
And do you
Sometimes.
get to work out some of the issues or the kinks in your life through the fictionalized telling of a story?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, depending on when I'm writing the book and like how. My last book in the series about academics called Curriculum Vitae is literally called Sabbatical. And so I was thinking about like, what was my sabbatical not for me? um, but I was also thinking about like I think a lot of academics go into their sabbatical thinking about all the work they can get done, which makes total sense. You have new projects, you have new things you want to do, which makes, it's fine. But it should also be a moment to rest, right? Like you get a sabbatical, depending on where you are, every 7 years, right? So that is a semester or 1 year where you don't have to teach. And so it should be a space for your brain to rest from all of the responsibilities you have, right? Most people though don't approach it that way. I didn't approach it that way. And so that book was about me thinking, oh, what if I had, right? Like what if I had prioritized like resting, and what if I had someone in my life who had been there to help me prioritize resting.
Well, resting is a movement now.
It
There's a
is
whole, and it's so revolutionary, I think, because no one ever tells Black women to sit down.
literally ever, right? They're like, oh, you have all these things on your plate, how can I give you a couple more, right? Like exactly.
Yes. So I'm fascinated by the nap culture and the rest ministry and all those
Mm-hmm.
opportunities for Black women to go sit down and and be okay and not feel guilty and
Yeah,
say no,
yeah.
to say no.
Which is like so hard for Black women, regardless of their industry, regardless of their age. Like the amount of times I just watch Black women across the spectrum who are like, oh, I have, like me, I look at myself, I have all these things on my plate, I'm doing all these things. And it's like, okay, but how was your sleep last night? Like, did you get a full 8? Did you get 6 even? Like what's going on here?
Oh my
And I
gosh.
think the big thing too, like we have learned over the last few decades, is like that has like severe health effects, right? Like it is adverse to our health that we don't rest, right? And so I am thinking about that as I'm writing about all these characters who need to learn how to slow down, right? It's like it's not explicitly stated in the books, but like it's because I understand if they don't do so now, right? In
Mm,
20 years, like that will cost them in ways that they cannot get back.
mm. Now, do your friends and family members and significant others and love interests, do they concern themselves with showing up in your stories? Like, do they say to you, Katrina, listen, I don't I don't want to show up in this book. And
Um,
do you hear it, and do you acquiesce to it? What do you do? How do you do that?
I've never had someone say that to me, so I guess maybe they don't care.
Or maybe they're flattered, right? I don't maybe
Maybe. I
or
mean,
maybe
I
they're
don't write
hoping.
about anyone specifically, but I do take like little bits and pieces of like, not conversations, but like things my friends are interested in, right? Like that shows up in my own life. And so, of course, it shows up in some way, like in my writing as well.
And none of your friends are like, girl, I recognize that, or I remember that, or I know what that is. No one says that.
No one said that to me.
I think you should ask.
I sent out a
Recognize
survey.
yourselves. And do you, when you're out in the world, do you lead with telling people you're a writer?
No, I don't. It's I
Why?
think Well, I think it's because, well, some of it is because so much of my identity has been about being a historian. Like, that is what I
Hmm.
trained to do. That's what my degree is in. For the most part, like when I meet people in person, like I'm probably meeting them in some way, connected to, well, first of all, I'm meeting them under my like actual name. So it would be very strange to be like, oh, awesome. But I also think that like being a romance writer is like it started off as a hobby. Like it wasn't a thing I stumbled into. Again, I mean, this is actually the sort of story of my life. I stumbled into this as a career. This was not the goal.
And so you have a pseudonym, you have this name, Katrina, but your name, your government name, as we say, is Nicole.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you pick Katrina? Why did you pick Katrina? Well, you could have picked anything, I would imagine.
Yeah. Well, one, I'm not that imaginative. Names are actually quite hard. Talk to any author, they will tell you that naming characters is very difficult. So naming myself was very difficult. But actually, I chose Katrina because I had a cat who, right around the time I was finishing my first book, was sick. And it was very clear that she was not going to last much longer. And so I just chose her name as my author name.
That's a sweet story.
It is. It's
That's a
sad, but
very
it's
sweet.
also
It's
sweet.
sad, but it's a sweet. I mean, it just means at least when you tell it, I hear that you had great love for this cat,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
and that it keeps the cat forever in your consciousness when you take the cat's name as your name
Yeah.
in this genre. So what do your colleagues think? What do your work colleagues think?
Nothing. I don't have
Okay.
one of my colleagues knows that I write fiction. Like none of them have ever read my book. This is not their cup of tea, which it does not have to be. I have like some colleagues who are not at my university who know that I write, who are very like supportive. But I think people thought, I certainly thought that this would be disruptive, that it would be strange that like I am a professor who writes, but like so many romance authors like are professionals. They are professors, they are lawyers, they are doctors. I mean, it is surprising how many people in this genre are also in their alter ego or in their real lives. People you would not expect.
Hmm. So, Katrina, are there black men romance writers out there?
Yes.
Who?
So my
Do you
friends,
know any?
I do. I do. I do. There are some, not a whole bunch, but there are some, and I wish there were more. I mean, my personal friends are Chris Stevenson and Jason Graham. And then there's also like Kosako Jackson, who's a queer Black man who writes. Like there are a few. Hopefully, there will be more in the future. But yeah,
Hmm. I just find it interesting that I don't hear much about black men
no.
um romance writers, except I do know the ones that write from a very same sex
Yeah.
space, you know.
There are a number of queer Black men. There could always be more, but there are also straight Black men. I think most of the ones I know are also indie, so they are self-publishing their own books. But yeah, they exist.
Mhm. All right, so what is the dream, Katrina? What we have a few minutes left. What is the dream as an author, as a professor, for your life? What is the big dream? Like when you wake up or when you think about forward, what do you see? What do you want?
Ooh, that's a hard question. You saved the hardest for last. Got that? Okay. Um, I mean, I think that my dream in writing is also my dream in teaching, is also my dream elsewhere, is to really sort of end up at a more just world. Like that is the like fantasy I'm still taking through my romances. Like how can I like contribute to like us ending up at a more just world where people are allowed to be themselves, where they are discriminated against, where they are allowed to like make room and space to care for one another. Like that is where I would like to end up. And some days it is easier to imagine that world than others.
I like that. Well, I so appreciate your time. It was a pleasure talking to you. I look forward to seeing you at Elm City Lit Fest in collaboration with the Yale, the Literature of Hope romance fiction conference. I look forward to meeting you, and I'm going to pick up some of your books and see what's happening.
Okay.
Now I'm an old lady, so I don't know. I try to broaden my horizon as best I can, but
Okay. Well, I mean,
you
you
know.
know, if you want a recommendation to ease you in.
Yeah. Oh no, give me one, girl. Let me write it down. Tell me which one I should start with.
I would start with either Back in the Day or Office Hours.
Okay. All right, I'm writing that down. I'm gonna go to my favorite bookseller and tell her, get me this book.
Okay. Those are like mild.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for giving me a warning. I'll ease into the other stuff. I like it. So, but thank you so much. I look forward to you being in New Haven and spending some time in our city. And I look forward to talking to you. Thank you so much for your time,
Thank you.
Dr. Jackson. Have a
Thank
good rest
you.
of your day.
You too. Bye.
All right, bye-bye. All right, Harry Jones, thank you so much. I'll be back tomorrow. And I think all this week I'm talking to Elm City Lit Fest authors because it's all about romance. And I'm sure I am going to pick up Katrina's books because I'm intrigued now. So thank you all for a wonderful Monday. It's a good time. So I'll be back tomorrow, Tuesday. Stay tuned.